afterwards, we talked to Charles Mittelstadt, who was the investigator for the defense, and here's a conclusion he draws.
Whoever committed this crime would have been covered in blood, and yet there was no blood found in Dionne's home, in her car, not on the laptop, not on the credit card, not on her clothing. It just doesn't exist.
One of the defense's contentions is that Herndon drove to Baugh's home the night of his death to give her his laptop computer. The show is called Both Sides, so here are the prosecution and the defense takes.
It's practically impossible to make that round trip within the window between the two conversations that we have. It's a window of about 40 minutes. Detective
William Anastasio decided that he would go ahead and actually make the run between Dionne Baugh's home and Lance Herndon's home and determine the mileage and the time that it took him 7 years after the fact. You know, Atlanta is a growing city. There's constant change here. You get new streets, new lights, new developments.
Very capable advocates on both sides of this case. Stay tuned. Lots more of this trial when we return.
If Dionne Baugh is not Herndon's killer, who is?
This case from the beginning was a whodunit.
Defense investigator Charles Mittelstadt says Herndon's life was full of intrigue, and the police investigation barely scratched the surface of his love life and business dealings.
Here's a man who truly was an illusionist. No one really knew Lance Herndon.
In fact, there were several hairs found in Herndon's bed that didn't match Dionne Baugh or any of Herndon's other known lovers.
The fact that there are unidentified hairs, by definition, is reasonable doubt. We have other people there that we can't identify.
But prosecutor Clint Rucker says he is confident the right person is in the defendant's chair.
She's greedy, she is evil, and she is guilty.
Welcome back. We have on the line from Atlanta, Georgia, Charles Mittelstadt. He was the investigator for the defense side in this case. And Mr. Mittelstadt, I want to ask you first, did anyone really know what Lance Herndon was really like?
No, and Fred, I believe that's the real story to this case, is that Lance Herndon was somewhat of an iceberg. I mean, we only knew what was above the surface, but early on in the investigation, I believe the authorities should have determined that there was so much more to Lance Herndon that really nobody knew about.
Such as?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Such as what?
Well, we really don't know all the full extent of his business dealings. We know that he was involved in a nightclub called the Vixen Club. We know that he was involved in making loans to individuals for purchase of vehicles and other small business transactions like that. We know about a deal that he had with Neville Harris. We know he dealt with Jazz Williams, and in fact was at odds with both of those gentlemen.
Was he really a successful businessman? I mean, how in the world, the chaotic life he lived, could he run a successful business?
I think that he had flashes of greatness within his career, but at the time of his death, and for several months leading up to it, I believe that he was on the decline and that there were serious problems. He was experiencing severe financial difficulty, had over $70,000 in credit card, in excess of $150,000 in tax liabilities. And so a lot of Lance Herndon was really an illusion.
Well, now, he conned two presidents of the United States. He was given a National Service Award in the White House by the first President, George Bush. And I want to ask you how in the world the Secret Service ever let that happen with the background this man had. And President Clinton said very admiring things of him. And under the Clinton administration, he went on a trade mission to South Africa, of all things. How did he con the leaders of our country? Don't they check people out?
Well, I don't know, what type of vetting process was involved in that. But there's no question that Lance Herndon had some impressive connections. But there was also a very secret side to Lance Herndon that, frankly, no one knew about. Clearly, Janine Hearn didn't know. His employees did not know. His mother didn't know. There's just no one probably truly knew the real Lance Herndon.
Mr. Mittelstadt, Ron Russo is a criminal defense lawyer, and he's got a question for you.
Certainly.
Hi, Charles. Good morning. Could you tell us what is it exactly that Access Inc. did? I mean, was it a consulting firm? Was it a manufacturer of goods and services? What was Access Inc.?
Essentially, Access Inc. Brokered technical support for within the computer industry, and so he had a number of subcontractors that he would get contracts, and then he would be responsible for providing these subcontractors to fulfill the contract. So he was essentially a broker.
And without revealing any confidences, was that his principal source of income? Is that basically how he supported himself?
By all appearances, yes.
Mr. Mittelstadt, how many other possible, if you listed them in your mind, how many other possible killers, other than your client, would there be out there?
Well, we don't know, and that is the real issue in this case, is we don't know because of the nature of the investigation. I mean, very, very early on, the law enforcement, the investigating team developed tunnel vision in this case. I mean, literally within days. Let's remember that Dionne Baugh was banned from Lance Herndon's funeral. I mean, she was singled out within days of his death. Within 9 days of his death, she was interrogated by Detective Anastasio and his partner. No one else was interrogated in this case. And what it appeared was that very early on, they developed a theory in this case, and instead of letting the evidence take them in a particular direction and direct the investigation, there's no question that very early on they were trying to make the evidence fit their theory in the case, ignoring a lot of evidence along the way and a lot of possible suspects.
Well, now you were out there and you were nosing around among all of these possible suspects, and you didn't come up with anyone that looked like a very likely killer in the case. There were some people who had some very rather unsavory connections to the victim, but it didn't much go beyond that.
Well, now let's keep in mind the defense doesn't have that burden. I mean, we don't have the burden of fingering the real killer. That is that's the prosecution's burden, and so we never approached this case in a defense perspective trying to identify the real killer. And the fact of the matter is, this case is so old, this occurred such a long time ago, that a lot of critical leads and critical witnesses that could have been useful to identifying the real killer no longer exist, or it's no longer possible to identify these folks. So we will never know ultimately who the real killer is, and that's a real tragedy in this case. I mean, this is pretty much it's almost entirely a circumstantial case that is based upon the prosecution's interpretation of the evidence.
Well, Charles, there's one difference in the way this case seems to me, from the defense point of view, to be tried, in that the first trial, there was more of an emphasis on one specific alternate killer, who was Kathy. In this proceeding, what I'm seeing is that the suggestion of other people being involved is far more diffuse, and that you're right, you don't have an obligation to establish who the other killer was. But is there, in fact, did the defense do that intentionally? Was there a motion away from trying to finger one person and instead to just throw the doubt into the jury's mind, which is really what your job is?
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. I mean, if you're going to finger someone specifically, you better be able to make a slam-dunk case against them. And we simply were never in that position, and the more I evaluated this case and investigated, the more it became obvious to me that no one really knew Lance Herndon, and the investigating team on behalf of the Roswell Police Department simply never did a sufficient comprehensive investigation that could have led this investigation into other more fruitful areas.
That you had a fertile field to plow there, and we appreciate you coming on with us and telling us about it. It's very interesting, and we'll see how it plays out as we continue to follow the case. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And we'll take a quick break.